Well, good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to be here with you today on a topic that some of us in the room are not just passionate about, but we're trying to figure out as we go along, and I'll share with you in a moment why that is. This particular topic is important to me because I hope or try to focus on how our research informs practice, or how we can better industries that our field serves. And so this particular study, as it says, was COVID-induced. It was a tipping point moment, as our good buddy Malcolm Gladwell would say, that caused instruction to change on the fly because of students and faculty being forced off campus. I'd like to introduce our team here. Of course, I'm Robert Strong at Texas A&M, John Mark Palmer in my lab. He's sitting back there. Give him one wave, John Mark. There you go. And Dr. Jennifer Zoller, she is in the Department of Animal Science at Texas A&M. So why I share both of those logos up there for you is a part of what you'll hear from me this afternoon is our opportunity was for multiple departments to come together to fund research assistance to answer an industry issue, both from a big science lens, I know some people don't like that term big science, and a social science lens for a particular problem that affects a rather large industry, okay? So the equine industry, if you're curious what kind of economic impact it has all over the world, the Equine Business Association out of Edinburgh estimates that over $300 billion are generated annually from the equine business or industry across the world. The majority of that coming from Europe, not the United States of America. In fact, so much from the continent of Europe that the United Kingdom and Ireland are separated from that particular income bracket, with, of course, the United States coming in second. And within the United States, the state of Texas has more than triple the amount of horses in that state than the second state in the United States in that list, which is California, and third being Florida. The point of this is that this industry is rather large, and in the literature, it is referred to as the invisible industry, meaning we see it all the time, but unless you're in that industry, you never look at it. Additionally, Smith & Jones in 2019 categorized the equine industry as the largest group of untapped donors or stakeholders in regions in both Europe and the United States of America. So at the very top there, top left, you see what's going on. That is an equine judging contest, pretty common in my part of the world. In the dead center, there you see a particular equine event, right? And on the far right, specifically in this room, some of our parts of the world, pretty common to see, still to this day, cowboys or ranchers using horses to do work. So what's the point of the three pictures? That is, we're talking about a really diverse industry, okay? So diverse that on the slide, you don't see the other half of the industry that is taking place. And that is the groups that sell feed, or medicine, or tack and equipment, or fencing materials. And so that part, two parts of this particular industry, large swath of people. So that's the equine industry in a nutshell across the globe. But of course, Europe first, which was kind of a surprise to me. Didn't know that, but the United States clearly in second, not even close between the two actually. Student learning outcomes, all of us, or most of us, are challenged to do that or address those every year in some type of report or part of our class, etc. And so with that, these things, as you know, if you work with that typically every day, they're different now than they used to be, right? We're asking more things, more information, not just numbers. What is the impact of your teaching? So we're going to talk about student learning outcomes in a moment. Also, we're going to talk about the evaluation model that we use to assess student learning in a virtual reality curricula dissemination. Specifically, we're going to talk about our good buddy Donald Kirkpatrick. Well, he's not with us anymore, but his children have taken up the mantle, and they now run the Kirkpatrick Evaluation Labs. We're going to talk about the 4 levels. Specifically, number 1, level 1 reactions, level 2 learning. We'll talk a little bit about results and very little about behavior, and I'll tell you why that is in a moment. This next piece, virtual reality. I love the title of this session. I don't know who came up with it on your team, but Youth and Young Adult Education. Virtual reality. Think about that for a moment, right? At this conference, we have 4 generations that are represented this week. We've got boomers all the way to the Gen Zs, okay? Virtual reality is a real challenge for me. Not just because I'm getting more motion sick as I get older, but I am not a digital native to that technology. Okay? So obviously our first thought may be, oh, the younger crowd, that's their thing, that's what they're into. Maybe so, but my wife and I have a good friend that's pretty highly educated. She's 70 years old, used to be a university administrator, and over the holidays in the US, she purchased her own virtual reality headset. Okay? And so maybe she's an outlier. Again, back to Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if he'll see this recording, but I've given him 2 citations already today. This VR piece is not going away. Virtual reality is here to stay. You're not going to hear from me in detail about Apple's device coming in a couple of years, that they are still working to figure out. It's so powerful, they have to put a fan on it. They're mad because none of their devices have a fan, and so they're still working to make that perfect. But virtual reality is not going away. And also, what I want you also to, I want you to not hear from me today is that virtual reality is the end-all, be-all. Here, we're reporting strictly on learning outcomes, not from an entire class, but from a specific lesson disseminated using virtual reality technology. Our good buddy Fred Davis created the technology acceptance model that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. I'm not going to go in detail about that. This is obviously not a class, right? But I want to focus in for you those 2 middle pieces, the perceived usefulness and the perceived ease of use. That is what we built our evaluation with for these respective students, realizing to the far left all those independent variables, those exist. I don't want to take anything away from them. But we're primarily interested in those 2, and the dead center is those, as Davis said, are predictors of, as Pablo said, intention and behavior of use. Okay? Coupled with our theoretical framework is also our good buddy, no longer with us, Everett Rogers. It seems like no one's with us. Isn't that too more, Dr. Dooley? Dr. Rogers talked about the 5 stages of persuasion. Remember, relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, trialability, and observability. We brought him into this as well. So our theoretical framework is multifaceted, both with Fred Davis and Everett Rogers' previous work, specifically about technology adoption and adoption holistically. Our purpose and objectives, what I should tell you about this particular class that what we evaluated, the name of the class is Equine Selection and Judging. Okay? Any student can take the class even if they're not interested in being on the equine judging team. Now, those interested in being on the equine judging team, they have to take the class. It is a prelude to really better understand which of those are ready or could be a part of the actual judging team. Now, I'm not sure how important sports are to where you live and work, but in our culture, at our school, judging teams are very important. It is very competitive. Okay? So it's not just the instructors teaching the class, they're also trying to figure out who in that group will actually be my final team and the alternates on our respective team, because they're competing with other institutions across the United States. Okay? So, you see there the assess student learning outcomes from VR use, right? That's obvious based on what we talked about a while ago. Also the ease of use. Okay, so 1 and 2 clearly are Fred Davis pieces there. And third, we wanted to gather student feedback on how to better develop and deliver that VR curricular content. So let's take a step back. What's going on? So it's an equine selection and judging course. One lesson plan in that course was a stock class of halter and Western horses. Okay? Because of COVID in 2020, that lesson was disseminated through VR. If you're wondering why that lesson, because that is the foundational lesson in equine judging. That is, students got to get that right. You know, it's not maybe or kind of, like they have to get that right because the rest of the lessons related to equine selection are much more challenging. Okay? So that was the fundamental, we might even call it a 101 part of that class. That was fundamental for them to know. So let's move on. So methodology, I don't want to spend a great deal of time there. This is data taken from the 2020 class immediately after COVID, and also the 2021 class, because they were still using virtual reality to disseminate that content. They're still using that this semester in 2022. That's just not happened yet, and obviously these were due, October 1, right? So that's the number of students you see there. There were a total of 18 students in both sections over those 2 spring semesters. Response rate of just a shade over 66%, response rate of 66%. You see the number of 12. I'm going to focus on that 12 quite a bit the rest of our time. Tailored design method, we're all familiar with Don Billman's work. I don't need to explain that in detail. Obviously, it's non-parametric stats based upon the number in the sample. We use qual traits to disseminate that instrument. Remember, we're still working virtually. We're still doing things virtually. And a good friend here to my left, inside her as well, and her publication in 2007 on how to address trustworthiness and credibility. And we use the themes identified by Braun and Clark to coalesce themes for our particular data. So moving forward, you see this majority of people. Here we go. Majority of people agree to improve their learning. Level 1 reactions. Majority of people also indicate they can apply what they learn. Right? That's results. They agree they can apply what they learn in real life evaluations, meaning if they went to a horse judging contest based upon what they learned in that VR module, they can put that into practice and hopefully do better in the actual contest. Right? And lastly here, they can apply standards of each judging class. Now why that's important is I've not talked about it yet. That remember, they're doing this at their own time, their own convenience, wherever they are, versus coming together as a group, driving in a van somewhere, communicating with someone about getting their horses up, and all the cost that's associated with that versus them, again, being unplaced bound. Objective 2, again, as we get into the qualitative data here, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds there. I'll let you read over that yourself. There's quite a bit going on there, but it's pretty specific. So you should be picking up the positives of the reactions, positive that they believe their learning has increased by that respective lesson being disseminated through virtual reality. And objectives 3, this was the objective that asked them for their feedback or what could be improved. I love this part because there's a certain time, John Mark and I talked about this, there's a certain amount of time specifically when I start to get dizzy or nauseous on these things. It's called cyber sickness. Right? We don't have enough data to make generalizations about when that is for people, but you'll see that in our recommendation is instructors and researchers should try to figure that out because it does exist. And what's funny, about this particular module is it was developed by the faculty, not by Sony PlayStation, right? There's a little difference in our skill sets, correct? And so it would make sense that students would start to feel that way because, just to be honest, a lack of professionals that know how to do that versus a Sony or Facebook or Meta or another particular entity. Okay? So these particular recommendations are being implemented this semester, and we're going to evaluate those in a couple of weeks. So conclusions. Students had positive reactions. Okay? As Kirkpatrick said, that's a smiley face evaluation. Great. Move on. Doesn't really tell you anything, but it gives insight into what's coming. Also, they believe that VR modules are easy to use. Everett Rogers, okay, compatibility. They had a relative advantage to what they had been doing before in a non-COVID environment. Also, they believe their learning increased. Okay, that's our good friend Kirkpatrick. and it increased their usage behavior. I can do this. I have experience. This is really cool. And of course, they walk through every persuasion stage of Rogers' diffusion of innovation, from what they've been doing before that, on the back end, on their observability. And one thing I will add for you here is that, I'll be the first to say, we're just in ag and life sciences, we're on the front end of this. There's not a single study in the College of Agriculture on this planet that can definitively say this is a great or works for everybody mode of instruction. We're still trying to figure that out. That is still ongoing. In colleges of engineering, they use it all the time. Why? Because their graduates may have to use it in the specific engineering field that they go into. For ours, at this moment in time, do not. So the next study for us, outside of students and faculty, is extension agents. And specifically, I love Gardner's hype cycle because it's a hype cycle, right? You get excited and you're no longer excited because you do it. So what we're trying to figure out is, can extension officers, can and are they willing to adopt virtual reality dissemination in their lessons? And if so, how can we teach them how to do that? And I'll end with, this is the parent article of this particular study. This is where it exists, if you'd like to see that or scan it. And with that, thank you so much. Any questions?
Questions from the group? Could you address a little bit the logistics? I mean, some students were sort of out off campus. Were they sent VR headsets? They had to check them out. How did they get access to be able to do this?
All the above,
Yes.
they did. And so at that time, as you would guess, it was chaos, for most of us that remember that. And so in this environment, it's really, I think because it was a small class, a class like this, I know the other Dr. Strong and Pablo talked about these high impact experiences, right? So obviously, hopefully they'd be more relation driven with those students because they're with them more, they're more immersed. So all those things did occur to help them get that information. And I think, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it, I think so much more flexibility was given because they're training those students to compete. Make sense? Versus, they want them to do well. And so, yeah. Does that help?
Sure.
Yes?
So with creating VR curriculum resources, is that difficult? I mean, is that an area, not that, but for like extension, or is it more you're thinking about being a user of curriculum VR materials that's already created, or both?
For me, it is. It is more challenging because that's not my training. I don't want that to be my training. And so there is a demand for getting these done professionally or the best you can, not just for that cyber sickness part that I mentioned, but also in this case, you want students to learn the best and be as successful as they can, right? And so I'm not the one, Dr. Zoller is not the one, John Mark is not the one that has training and expertise in developing that. So a collaboration, some level of synergy with another entity to make that occur would be ideal. Rodeos in the United States, rodeos are credited with the first ones adopting VR technology to teach safety and rules and guidelines. And so that's where this came from, was, rodeos are doing it. Why don't we give that a shot? But I find it very challenging. Mm-hmm. Yes?
How do you think virtual reality education can impact online instruction for the future? And the FDA should partner with other technology enterprises and companies to make it not only better in case of quality, but also available for more people across not only the nation, but worldwide maybe?
Yes. It's a great question. I think, like most instructional technology, it's supplemental to me. I respect people that are going all in on VR. Just to be honest, we don't have enough data that would indicate to go all in. We just don't. And I don't think anyone in the College of Agriculture, based upon our work across the world, can say that. Based on, now engineers can say that. And answer your question about access, we believe that's the biggest challenge. And so why equine industry? I mentioned Europe, United States, right? Very developed, resources plentiful, just to be honest, easier to get to. We have, hundreds, John Mark, 100 cardboard VR headsets where individuals can put their phone in, and then view it that way. So most developing areas, a lot anyway around the world have phones. But I'm not sold that I just don't have enough information to definitively say this is what we should be doing in a college of agriculture. If we're preparing our students to work in industry or to support industry like equine, we don't have enough information, in my opinion, just to make that call. Does that make sense?
Yes, and also kind of make also the availability for people across different countries. For example, they don't need to fly from Europe to the US to get a training or something like that, but use virtual reality as a instruction method,
Yes.
for easy access or as easier as could be.
I totally agree. I think that access part is clearly a barrier, and to me, it widens the divide amongst groups that have quicker access to information, this group here, and another group that doesn't have that at all. And so, I'm not yet to be a proponent of VR. I think there's a lot of things in our schools that we have to figure out, and particularly for our stakeholders, how that works for them. Clearly, in the equine industry, they like it, and they've adopted it, right? But we're also talking about, in some cases, just to be honest, a higher level of SES than some of our other stakeholders. And so maybe it's context bound. Maybe it could be used in integrated pest management, right? Maybe it could be used in meat science, which they're trying to do that at our university. Maybe it could be used in horticulture, identifying plant diseases. Anyway, there's a lot of question marks there, right? But you made me think of something. We are also partnering with the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences at our place. So the sharing of dollars amongst departments for research assistance, I think that's the greatest thing we've learned so far. It's collaboration or synergy is critical for bench science outcomes and for the social science piece as well. Thank you.
Yes, all right, that's our time.